Welcome to Concussion Talk Podcast. This is episode 82, and I'm Nick Mercer.
And I'm Darren Guilfoyle.
And before we get started talking to Ella Sofia, we would first like to thank our sponsor, HeadCheck Health. Concussion Talk Podcast is presented by HeadCheck Health. HeadCheck Health bridges the gaps in concussion care through simple, powerful technology. Join organizations like the Canadian Football League, Trek Factory Racing, the Canadian Junior Hockey League, Eastern Washington University, and Volleyball Canada, who rely on HeadCheck Health to improve communication and optimize care. Visit headcheckhealth.com for more. So thank you very much, Ella Sofia, for joining us on this episode 82. And my first introductory question to you is, can you just explain what happened to you when you were 14 and tell everybody, explain what that arteriovenous malformation is?
Yeah.
So it's a long intro.
Sounds good. So when I was 14 years old, I had an AVM, arteriovenous malformation, rupture in my cerebellum, which caused a hemorrhagic stroke. So what that is, well, first of all, I did not know it was there. So what an AVM is, explained in very layperson's terms, because I am just a layperson, not a medical professional. It's when your arteries and your veins are supposed to come together via these tiny little blood vessels called capillaries. And in my head, the capillaries didn't form correctly. And when they formed, they kind of were in this big jumbled malformed mess. And that big jumble is called a nidus. And so there's nothing really there to regulate or slow down the pressure of blood. So my whole life, the blood was pumping as it should have been. And then one day, that nidus, I kind of picture it like a balloon. It was getting bigger. And then one day it ruptured. And so I was in grade 9, and that led to a massive headache. It's probably the first time in my life that I actually ever experienced a headache. So I knew something was off. I didn't really think anything of it, like to call home. I figured, if I called home to go home because of a headache, my parents would be like, "Are you kidding me? I'm not leaving." So I ended up going to my 5th period drama class, and I ended up fainting because the pressure in my head. And they got the first responders. They had to put in a breathing tube, threw me in the MRI, and they found the bleed.
Wow. But that's yeah. So you obviously finished high school because you did your master's and your undergrad in Waterloo. So just can you actually, well, yes, you'll lead up to that by asking you this question about happy creation. Where did you come up with the thought that happy creation was the way to, why did you want to, when did you decide that helping people with brain injury and stroke was your, I don't say calling, but your calling, yeah.
Yeah, good question. So it's a long story, as most of my stories are, but I will make it short. No. So basically, growing up, I kind of went through a few different career paths that I felt strongly about. None of them had to do with brain injury. One was a paleontologist, because I wanted to be like Ross Geller, a paleontologist.
Oh, paleontologist, nice. Like Indiana Jones, yeah.
Like Ross Geller.
Oh, Ross Geller, yeah.
So that was the first one. And then I noticed growing up I was excelled in math. And so I was thinking something along the lines of math, or science, mostly math, and then possibly going to law school afterwards. And then after I had my brain injury, I noticed that, based on my marks and the way I felt, I just couldn't do math as well. I just operated slower, it seemed. And so I decided, okay, math wasn't the path for me, but I was still interested in law school.
Did you still enjoy math, or did you just not like it as much as well? Sorry,
that's a good question. No, that's a good question, because I still enjoy math to this day, even when I have to do little things. Like I used to work as a cashier, and you have to do little bits of math in there,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I I enjoy it, but because it's particularly in high school, I struggled at it so much because I felt like I didn't have enough time that led me to not enjoy it whatsoever.
oh, okay.
Uh, yeah, and
So you're
so
saying, go
and
ahead.
so oh yeah, so I decided I wanted to go to do law, some type of criminal law,
Okay.
psychology. And by the time I got to grade 12, I was figuring out what schools I wanted to apply to. And it's funny how it worked out. I never originally intended on going to Waterloo, but then when I was looking at all these schools, Waterloo stuck out as like the smart people school, at least in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
region. And going through high school, particularly after having this brain injury, I felt I was stupid, and was called that sometimes, and from like people poking fun. Um, but I felt like I needed to compensate for my lack of intelligence by going to the smart people school.
yeah.
So I ended up going to Waterloo. I got accepted and I ended up going there and went through my undergrad. And it wasn't until my master's degree where I did a talk on brain injury awareness, kind of spur of the moment, where I kind of flipped. I was like, this is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life.
Okay. Well, so that's yeah, it's occasion for sure. So then my next question, I guess, is the habit creation thing. Where did you get this habit? Because I know that's your main, your one, your well, not your main. I don't know your main, but your big thing. That's the Instagram stuff. Is your habit creation. So how did this idea come about?
So for habits, um, okay, it kind of, I think I
Oh,
recognize
sorry, and I'll
habit.
just and how does it apply to your, how does that apply to brain injury and brain injury recovery? So it's kind of
Yeah,
an
yeah.
encompassing question.
Okay, so I think I noticed habits in my life playing a big part in my life post brain injury before I knew what it was. Like I didn't
Right,
have a name for it.
right.
Um, reason being, or to give you an example, I should say, when I was soccer, that was my big piece of my identity that I felt like I lost after my brain injury. And
Okay.
so when I played soccer, I noticed that I could still do some things habitually, but coordinating new decisions on the field or learning new things in practice and then applying them up to the field were a little bit more difficult. But I could still do them
But these
habitually.
they were fine before that. They were smoother before that. I think.
Yeah, I would just
Okay.
have that like quicker brain before that, but then all of a sudden, like after the stroke, everything just seemed to slow down from math and things
Okay.
in school
Right.
to on the soccer field.
Okay.
So I noticed that I could still do things habitually. Again, I didn't have a name for it. It's just kind of something I noticed. And then again, it wasn't really until the tail end of my master's degree. And I don't know what um, drove me, but I was at the bookstore actually with a friend, and we were looking at books. I hadn't really picked up a book in a really long time, recreation. And she saw this one. She's like, "Oh, I heard this one's good," and it was actually The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And and I was like, "Oh, okay, well, I'll buy it then." And it was probably the first book I read recreationally for in a long time, and it was all about habit and it explained things really well layperson's terms, and that's what kind of spurred my interest in habit and conserving energy. And then, hindsight's 2020, but after I started doing a lot of reading about the brain and how habit works in the brain, parts of the brain, that's when I kind of started to connect a little bit of dots, thinking, oh, maybe that's why I could still do some things on the soccer field, for example, but
Yeah.
new coordinating was difficult. So I kind of um, took that and learned as much as I could about habit, and now I'm trying to teach it to as many people as I can to help them conserve energy when they are recovering after a brain injury.
And I'll also ask that as I noticed you in your not podcast, but the constant chats like episode 5. It's not you just when you spoke to the McGill group, and also on your website you have you seem to really like visualization. Does that help you or visualization? Is that something you find personally that helps you, or is that something you learned or that you know helps other people more?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It kind of goes hand in hand with creating habits, this idea of visualizing. Um, okay, so when it comes to habits are really, there's like a paradox almost to habit, because when you create a habit, what you've created is a sort of unconscious, or I usually use the word subconscious behavior. Yeah. But they start as highly focused behaviors. Right. You have to focus on exactly what you're going to be doing and make sure you're repeating that task within the same context until it becomes unconscious. So it starts as conscious, becomes unconscious. So that's sort of the paradox of habit. And so when you're starting to create a habit for the first time, this idea of mental focus and visualization is going to help you, be conscious about whatever you're trying to create so that you can do it over and over again, really. And then the other aspect of visualization, it helps with motivation. So when I can visualize myself doing something before I've done it, say I'm scared or nervous to do it, but if I can visualize myself doing it first, I kind of create some evidence for myself that I can do it. I'm not just like lying to myself, telling myself, I can do it. But if I actually visualize myself, say if I want to lift a dumbbell, like if I actually really try and visualize that, feel my muscles contracting a little bit. Yeah. Now I've given myself a little bit of evidence for actually picking up that dumbbell in real life and doing a curl, just an example.
So is that, before I turn it over to, because Aaron asked you more questions about retainyourbrain.ca or .com. Anyway, but you'll discuss that .ca. Well, okay, Aaron asked you that. But did you find that visualization was something that helped you before your brain injury? I know that you were a lot younger then, but I didn't really need it. It was mostly, I guess, your experience and kind of see. You kind of don't really need as much memory. Visualization is more just you've like made a move or whatever, gave the ball a certain place, and you've seen what happens. But so I guess that's kind of where that came from. Maybe that's why that helped you. But did you find visualization helped you before your brain injury? And so after that, Aaron. Oh. Sorry, after that, Aaron can ask questions about your retainyourbrain.ca. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So I did not know anything or do anything related to habit or visualization or pretty much any of the things that I do now that have helped me risk manage my life. I took a lot of the things that I do now actually from my master's degree. In my master's degree, I studied risk management, physical security in airports is what I wrote my paper on. And when I wrote this, I realized that a lot of these risk management we do in physical security can be applied to the sort of security of my mind. And so all the stuff I do now, I did not do it before brain injury. And if I did, I would be a totally different person.
Yeah.
It's possible too, like those things could have been unconsciously done and you just didn't realize it. But the point of your studying your program, I imagine, is to become aware of those things and really try to make them to the forefront of the brain and help people. So for Retrain Your Brain and that whole branding, that idea you kind of touched on, like you'd picked up that book and you kind of got the idea from there. Is that solely kind of where it came from, or how did that idea develop into a whole website and a blog?
Really good question. The book was definitely helped me kickstart things. Actually, no, what helped me really kickstart everything was that talk I did. I just mentioned it briefly at the end of my master's degree. And so I actually did it I used to work for the federal government, and I had basically was going through repressing all these feelings after my brain injury until I kind of reached my rock bottom, and I was just going through this serious decline in my mood where it started affecting everything. And so I ended up finally reaching out to somebody at work, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, you should, put it on our intranet blog." And I did, and then somebody saw it, and long story short, we ended up getting a bunch of people together to do a bunch of talks during brain injury awareness. And I remember sitting at a meeting one day with all these people, and I was like the youngest one there. I was still a co-op actually at the time. And they were talking about which PTs or what kind of people related in the brain injury field that we wanted to have come in and talk. And everyone's kind of looking at the table, who should we get? Who should we get? And I was like, I'll do it. And they were like, what? And so I ended up doing this talk. And at that moment, I knew I wanted to do something in the brain injury field. I didn't know how really to do it yet. So I just started running very, very short blogs. I just got a WordPress blog and started writing these tiny little ideas. It was like keeping a diary and sharing it with the world. Mm-hmm. As I was writing, and the more I kind of got to look at the patterns in my own ideas, I realized the most prominent pattern was not just learning to retrain the physiology or like the wiring of your brain, I should say. It was that you could use your mind to do that, because that's what I needed to rely on after my brain was injured, was my mind. And that's an aspect of the brain. Again, this is layperson's terms. I'm sure doctor or neurologist would describe it differently. But yeah, so it was really that was the pattern I noticed. I need to have this strong sense of self-discipline, and use as many tactical things in my mind, or like little mind tricks, to try and retrain my brain and better myself. So that's kind of where that came.
That's really cool. How difficult or rewarding really has it been going through this business process with the whole idea of retrain your brain?
That's a great question. It's been incredibly rewarding. Like, it's very difficult because you don't really have anybody to compare to. Like, nobody's telling you, you're not going to work every day and nobody's telling you, hey, you need to do this differently, you need to do this better. You're just kind of throwing the spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, right? I've also gone through a lot of different changes in my life in the past 2 years, with moving from the Ottawa, Ontario, out to Edmonton, and then moving back home to Hamilton, changing careers. And so dealing with that while trying to be an advocate at the same time and run a blog and the YouTube, and you guys know how it goes, has been challenging. Mm-hmm. But I've definitely come to a place in my life where I've realized, like, as much as I want this to be a full-time job, it doesn't matter what I need to do to pay my bills. I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life, because that's how rewarding it is.
That's great. Yeah, I went through your Instagram and I was like, oh my gosh, she creates so much content. This is amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
In terms of habits for yourself, do you find that there's like a really big one or a particular one that you always daily have to do?
Yeah. Okay. So one that I was thinking about yesterday, because I noticed it's been working so well. And again, these aren't really big, like, habits. I always say micro behaviors, really small things, but when you're doing them over time, you can create really big change. And these things don't have to be habitual. You can just do small changes over time, but if you make them habitual, it's helpful. And one thing that I started doing a couple years ago, maybe, is this thing called the phone parking lot. And I'm sure it's not a novel concept, but of course to me, I'm like, this is new and it's amazing. I have to share it with the world. But essentially what it is, because you have your cell phone in your hand. If you put it down, you're like, where's my phone? And it's like sitting on a table somewhere. Like you always forget where you put it down. And I was sick and tired of doing this, having somebody, oh, can you call my phone? Can you call my phone? And so I'm like, I need to make a parking lot for my phone. And so what I did is just got a white piece of computer paper, made like a makeshift parking lot with a bright marker. And this spot is reserved for Ella's phone. Put it on the corner of the coffee table where I usually do work in the living room. And every time I went to go put the phone down, I would be visually cued by that parking lot and make sure to put my phone screen side down in that parking lot. And I'm doing this all the time, every day, multiple times a day, to the point where I noticed I was going to other people's houses or visiting people where I'd be now putting my phone screen side down in the corner of coffee tables. And I'd always know where to look for it if I forget where it was. And I think that one, although again, it's a very small thing, it has been unbelievably helpful. I don't remember the last time I had to go to somebody and say, hey, can you call my phone? I don't know where I put it.
It definitely seems like it would help too with decreasing your screen time as well. Like you're literally facing it down so you don't have to notice and be distracted by it too.
Yep, definitely.
Multiple benefits there.
Yep, definitely.
I guess my last question too was just, is there any additional therapies that you would recommend, not only for yourself, but also clients that you might have and other brain injury survivors?
Yeah, great question. All great questions. I'm saying that after every question today. So after I had my brain injury, so I was 14 at the time, that would have been just over 13 years ago. And mental health was definitely not as prominent as it is nowadays. Like we've gone through a lot of positive changes when it comes to talking about mental health and dealing with it and managing it. And so as I was going through recovery, I was able to physically rehabilitate fairly quickly, also because I was just so young. I was very lucky. But I didn't have this mental rehabilitation. And it wasn't until I sort of hit my rock bottom at that 10-year mark, it was a sort of transformational moment for me where I reached out to that colleague that I realized, oh my gosh, sometimes it doesn't matter what you have to do physically to adapt after an injury. Like you always have to be able to engage your mental capacity to be able to make those adaptations. And mental rehab, again, as I like to call it, is so vital. And so that said, I totally always encourage people to reach out to mental health professionals, even if you don't think you need it. Sometimes it's good to just talk about things with somebody, and through that conversation, they may bring things out of you that you didn't notice you were doing or holding in. And the other thing that's really important is I don't think that all mental health professionals are the same. They're humans. And so sometimes it will take visits to 4 or 5 or 6 different ones to find the one that fits for you. That's exactly what I had to do. So don't get discouraged and keep going until you find the right one. I would definitely encourage people to do that.
It's definitely a good message. And so where can anyone find you? Website, Instagram, all that stuff? Feel free to plug it now.
Yeah, thank you. So you guys can go over to my website, retrainyourbrain.ca, not .com, retrainyourbrain.ca. From there, you can definitely follow my other social media. So I'm on Instagram mostly, and Facebook and Twitter, but mostly Instagram at Ella Sofia, spelled with 3 S's. And then I'm also on YouTube, the same thing, Ella Sofia.
Perfect.
Right.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I
Thank you so much,
just have one last question. It's more of a remark, more of an observation and a question, but me you can comment on it. Is that I was talking to the concussion, which are all the McGill concussion legacy thing, and on a group on Thursday, and I was mentioning we had up the same thought that you kind of mentioned about, because I noticed that my brain injury, that one of the difference between me and these concussion survivors is that it's concussion sufferers have seem to have more problems with challenges with mental health, mental like emotional issues and stuff like that, psychology, and it's because people don't see them as being injured because this, as they say, it's an invisible injury. But whereas mine was like a coma, so it was very obvious that I was injured, and wasn't not something I found that I had less of a problem with that, but maybe that's hindsight, probably is actually. But you were like you were saying you were lucky because you were so young, which I guess people would be like, what? You had a stroke when you were 14. That's not lucky, but perspective, I guess, is what you're kind of like going with there.
That's a really good point. Perspective is everything. I'll to add to what you're saying. I consider myself lucky because I compare myself to people who are going through what's like the more difficult challenges. I'm grateful that I don't like with the challenges that I have, or really they're not. It's been 13 years. It's been so long for me that I almost don't even consider them challenges or deficits more. They're just part of my life. And so I look at other people who have more challenges, relatively speaking, and for that reason I consider myself lucky. And I think that's important to be able to recognize the difficulties that other people go through so we can understand the reality of our own situation. Okay, it could be worse. And some people hate, that doesn't mean just by saying it could be worse, I don't want you to think your own feelings aren't valid. Just recognize that, okay, things could maybe be worse. Maybe you have a different word. Things could be different.
Yes.
But I'm still going through challenges, and I still feel different than I was pre-stroke or pre-concussion. And that, to me, or to you, whoever's injured, that's the only thing that matters. The fact that you're different. End of sentence. Doesn't matter how much or how little. Just the fact that I feel different is going to be challenging. And we can't brush that under the rug.
Well, thanks. Great. So, sorry, I kind of threw that one at the end there, but and then we kind of left off before you got after the social media stuff. So, just wanted
No worries.
So people can find you all on mostly Instagram and YouTube, and Facebook and Twitter, but mostly Instagram and YouTube.
Yeah, and mostly active on Instagram. Everything that I post through Instagram goes to Facebook anyways, and of course I still chat with people on Facebook. But yeah, mostly active on Instagram and YouTube. I do put out a lot of more longer form content, I guess.
Great. Well, thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks, Ella.
Thank you.
Music at the beginning of this podcast is by Ben Sound, www.bensound.com.